The train wheezed to a stop at Ember Creek Station like a dying beast, black smoke curling into the winter sky. The platform was nothing more than rotting planks and rusted rails, the whole place looking like it might blow away with the next strong wind. February in the territories was cruel, and this particular evening in 1889 seemed determined to prove it. She stepped down from the last car, her worn boots hitting the frozen ground with a hollow thud. No luggage, no companion, just a thin shawl wrapped around narrow shoulders and a bonnet pulled low enough to shadow her face. The few passengers who'd gotten off before her had already scattered, heads down against the biting wind, rushing toward whatever warmth awaited them in town. The girl stood alone on the platform, 20 years old if the station master had to guess, though something in her posture made her seem both younger and infinitely older. She didn't move like the other passengers, didn't hurry toward shelter. Instead, she stood perfectly still, as if testing whether the ground beneath her feet was real. "Miss," the station master called from his booth. "Train's the last one tonight. Best get yourself into town before full dark." She turned toward his voice, and he caught a glimpse of pale skin stretched too tight over fine bones. A purple shadow bloomed along her left jaw, mostly hidden by the bonnet's brim. Her eyes, green as spring grass, held the kind of wariness he'd seen in spooked horses. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely carrying over the wind, Eastern accent, refined despite the tremor in it. She pulled the shawl tighter and started walking toward the cluster of buildings that made up Ember Creek's main street. The town wasn't much to look at even in good weather. Tonight, with ice crystals dancing in the air and shadows stretching long, it looked downright hostile. The saloon's yellow light spilled onto the street, along with the sound of rough laughter and clinking glass. The general store was already shuttered, as was the small church at the street's end. Only Mrs. Morrison's boarding house showed signs of welcome, lamplight glowing behind lace curtains. She made it halfway down the street before the trouble started. Well, what do we have here? 3 men emerged from the saloon's warmth, whiskey heavy on their breath. The one in front, Jake Harmon, was known for making problems when he drank, which was most nights. Don't recall ordering any entertainment from the city. The girl stopped but didn't turn around. Her fingers found the ends of her shawl, gripping until her knuckles went white. "I'm looking for Mrs. Morrison's boarding house," she said to the frozen dirt at her feet. "Are you now?" Jake moved closer, his friends flanking him like wolves. "Might be we could show you someplace warmer, friendlier. Please, I just need—" "What you need is to be more social." Jake reached for her arm, and she flinched away so violently she nearly fell. The movement knocked her bonnet askew, revealing more of the bruise along her jaw and another, older, yellowing at her temple. "Now that's interesting," Jake said, his smile turning meaner. "Someone already started the party without us." The girl's breathing came quick and shallow, like a rabbit in a snare. She looked ready to run, but there was nowhere to go. The street stretched empty in both directions, every window suddenly dark, every door firmly closed. Ember Creek knew when to mind its own business. "Step back." The voice came from the shadows between buildings, low and steady as distant thunder. Jake's hand froze inches from the girl's shoulder. Ethan Rain emerged from the darkness like he was part of it, 6 feet of lean muscle and coiled violence, wrapped in a long duster that had seen better decades. His hat shadowed his face, but there was no missing the warning in his stance. The way his hand rested casual-like near the colt on his hip spoke louder than shouting. "This ain't your concern, Rain," Jake said. But he'd already taken a step back. His friends had moved even further, suddenly finding the saloon's doorway mighty interesting. "Didn't say it was—" Ethan's voice held no emotion, flat as pond water. "Said step back." "Since when do you care about—" "Since now." The 2 men stared at each other across 10 feet of frozen street. The girl stood between them, trembling like a leaf, though whether from cold or fear was anyone's guess. Somewhere a dog barked, the sound sharp in the winter air. Jake broke first, as Ethan had known he would. Men like Jake were only brave in groups, and his friends had already decided they had urgent business elsewhere. "Wasn't nothing anyway," Jake muttered, spitting into the dirt. "Just being friendly. Be friendly somewhere else." Jake threw one more look at the girl, ugly promise in his eyes, then stalked back toward the saloon. The doors swung shut behind him with a bang that echoed off the empty building sound. The girl sagged like a puppet with cut strings. Ethan thought she might fall, but she caught herself, pride or stubbornness keeping her upright. "Thank you," she whispered. Ethan studied her in the dim light. The bruises, the too thin frame, the way she held herself like she expected more blows to fall. He'd seen enough in his 35 years to recognize someone running from something worse than winter. "Morrison's is closed," he said. "Has been for 2 days. Influenza." The girl's shoulders dropped another inch. "I see. There's a hotel 2 streets over." He didn't mention it was a flea-infested hole that rented rooms by the hour, or that a woman alone wouldn't last the night there without worse trouble than Jake Harmon. Thank you." She turned to go, though he could see she had no idea which direction was 2 streets over. Ethan watched her take 3 unsteady steps, watched her pause to lean against a post, exhaustion clear in every line of her body. He thought of the empty rooms in his house on the hill, of the silence that pressed against the windows every night, of the promise he'd made to stop caring about anyone else's troubles. "Wait." She turned back, hope and fear warring in those green eyes. He shouldn't. Every instinct screamed against it. He'd built his walls high and thick for good reason, but there was something about the way she stood there, chin up despite everything, that reminded him of— No, he wouldn't think about that. "You know how to ride?" Confusion flickered across her face. Yes, why?" Instead of answering, Ethan whistled low and sharp. A moment later, his horse emerged from the alley where he'd left it, a massive black gelding that moved like smoke. The girl took an instinctive step back. "Easy. Shade." Ethan swung up into the saddle with practiced ease, then held out his hand. "You can take your chances with the hotel, or you can come with me. I don't even know you." "Name's Ethan Rain. I own a ranch 5 miles north. Big house, empty rooms. You'll be safe." He paused, then added, "Safer than here, anyway." She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the saloon where Jake's laughter drifted through the doors, the boarding house with its dark windows, the empty street that offered no alternatives. "I don't have money to pay for—" Didn't ask for any. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then she reached up and took his hand. Her fingers were ice cold and trembling, but her grip was firm. He pulled her up behind him, noted how little she weighed, how carefully she held herself, even sharing a saddle. "Hold on," he said. Her arms went around his waist, tentative as butterfly wings. He could feel her shaking through the layers of coat and shirt. They rode out of Ember Creek in silence, leaving the yellow lights and rough laughter behind. The road north was barely more than a deer track, winding through stands of pine and open meadows crystallized with frost. The girl didn't speak, didn't ask where they were going or why he'd offered. Maybe she was past caring. Maybe she figured anywhere was better than where she'd been. Ethan kept shade to an easy walk, aware of how his passengers swayed with exhaustion. The moon rose full and bright, turning the landscape silver and strange. In the distance, his ranch sprawled across the hillside, the big house dark as a tomb. "Almost there," he said, the first words either had spoken in miles. She didn't respond, but her grip tightened slightly. He wondered if she was praying, wondered what kind of person she was, underneath the bruises and fear, wondered why he cared. The gate to Rain Ranch hung crooked on its hinges, Another thing he'd been meaning to fix and never got around to. The house loomed before them. 2 stories of weathered wood and broken dreams. He'd built it for a family that no longer existed, and now it stood like a monument to everything he'd lost. "It's big," the girl said softly, the first real observation she'd made. "Too big." He helped her down, steadying her when her legs buckled. In the moonlight, her face was pale as porcelain, the bruises standing out in sharp relief. "Kitchen's through there," he said, pointing to the side door. "I'll see to the horse." She nodded and walked toward the house, each step careful and deliberate. He watched until she disappeared inside, then led Shade to the barn. The familiar routine of unsaddling and brushing helped quiet the voice in his head that kept asking what the hell he thought he was doing. When he finally entered the kitchen, she was standing by the cold stove, arms wrapped around herself, looking lost. "I'll get a fire going," he said. "I can do it." "You're about to fall over." She didn't argue, sinking into one of the kitchen chairs like she might never get up again. Ethan busied himself with kindling and matches, aware of her eyes following his movements. "Why?" she asked finally. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Maybe I'm tired of eating my own cooking." A smile ghosted across her face, there and gone. "I can cook." "Good." The fire caught, warmth beginning to creep into the room. "There's a room upstairs. End of the hall. Beds made up." "I still don't have money." Still didn't ask. He straightened, dusting off his hands. "What's your name?" The silence stretched so long he thought she wouldn't answer. Then, so quiet, he almost missed it. "I don't know what it is anymore." Ethan looked at her then. Really looked. Saw the kind of damage that went deeper than bruises. The kind of running that meant you couldn't even carry your own name anymore. "Fair enough," he said. "Get some rest. We'll figure out the rest tomorrow." He left her there by the growing fire and climbed the stairs to his own room. Through the window, Ember Creek's lights twinkled in the distance like fallen stars. He'd gone down there for supplies, nothing more. Now he had a nameless girl in his kitchen and a feeling in his gut that his carefully ordered isolation was about to end. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling across the yard. Winter in the territories was cruel. But sometimes, Ethan thought as he pulled off his boots, cruel was just another word for necessary. Sometimes you needed the cold to appreciate the warmth. Sometimes you needed the dark to recognize the light. And sometimes you needed a stranger to remind you that you were still capable of giving a damn. He lay back on his bed, fully clothed, listening to the sounds of movement below, the scrape of a chair, the clank of the stove door. Small, careful sounds of someone trying not to take up space. Tomorrow would bring questions. Tomorrow would bring complications. But tonight, there was a fire in his kitchen and someone else breathing in his empty house. For now, that was enough. The morning sun crept over the eastern hills like a cautious visitor, painting Rain Ranch in shades of gold and shadow. Ethan had been up since before dawn, as was his habit, moving through the morning chores with the mechanical precision of a man who'd done them 1,000 times. Feed the horses, check the water troughs, mend the fence post that had been leaning since last month's storm. He'd avoided the house, telling himself it was because the work needed doing, not because he was uncertain about the stranger sleeping in his spare room, not because her presence had disrupted something fundamental in the carefully ordered world he'd built around his grief. When he finally entered through the kitchen door, she was there, standing at the stove, wrapped in a blanket she must have found in the room, stirring something that smelled like actual food instead of the burnt offerings he usually managed. "Morning," she said without turning around. "You should be resting." "I've rested." She ladled something into a bowl and set it on the table. "Porridge, with what I could find in your pantry, which wasn't much." Ethan hung his hat on the peg by the door, noting how she kept the table between them. Smart girl. Haven't been to town for supplies in a while." I noticed. She moved back to the stove, every motion careful and contained. In the morning light, the bruises looked worse. Purple and yellow painting a map of violence across her skin. "Your coffee's terrible, by the way." "Always has been." "I can fix that." They ate in silence, the only sounds the clink of spoons against bowls and the wind rattling the loose shutter he'd been meaning to fix. She ate like someone who'd been hungry for a long time small. Quick bites, eyes darting to the door every few seconds. "About the name thing," Ethan said finally. Her spoon stilled. "What about it?" "Need to call you something, if you're staying." "Am I staying?" He pushed his empty bowl away. "That's up to you. But while you're here, need something to call you besides hey you." She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Ruth. You can call me Ruth." "That your real name?" "It's a name." Her chin lifted slightly, daring him to push. "That enough?" "It'll do." Ruth, biblical, the woman who followed her mother-in-law to a strange land. Where you go, I will go. Fitting, maybe, for a woman running towards something instead of away. "I need to go to town later." She said, "Find work." "No." The word came out harder than he'd intended. She flinched, and he cursed himself for forgetting how easily frightened she was. "I mean," he said more gently, "might want to wait a few days. Let those bruises fade some. Ember Creek's not kind to strangers on a good day." "I can't just—" "You can cook. You can clean if you've a mind to, though Lord knows this place is past saving. Call it earning your keep." She studied him across the table, those green eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "Why are you doing this?" "Already told you. Tired of my own cooking." "That's not an answer." Ethan stood, carried his bowl to the wash basin, through the window. His land stretched out brown and dormant under the winter sun. 500 acres of grass and sagebrush. Good for cattle if he had a mind to run them again. Good for horses. Good for nothing much else. "People talk," Ruth said behind him. "In town, about you. Imagine they do. They say you killed a man 5 years ago." His hands stilled on the dish. "That what they say?" "They say other things too, about the fire, about—" She trailed off. "My wife and daughter." The words came out flat, emotionless. He'd learned to say them that way, like they were just words instead of knife wounds. "Yes, they died in a fire. No, I didn't kill anyone. The man who said it did that himself when he tried to run and his horse threw him. Broke his neck clean through." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. Wasn't your doing." He heard her chair scrape back, heard her moving around the kitchen. When he turned, she was heating water for washing, her movements efficient despite the obvious pain she was in. "You don't have to—" "I do." She didn't look at him. "I need to be useful. If I'm not useful, I'm just taking charity, and I can't—" Her voice broke slightly. "I need to earn my place." Ethan recognized the fierce pride in her words, the desperate need to feel like more than a burden. He'd felt it himself those first months after the fire, when neighbors had tried to help and he'd driven them all away rather than be pitied. "All right," he said, "but you take it easy. This place has been falling apart for years. Another day won't matter." He left her to it and headed back outside. There was always work on a ranch, even one as neglected as his had become. He spent the morning replacing boards in the barn wall, aware of movement in the house, the flash of her through windows, the smoke rising from the chimney, signs of life in a place that had been dead too long. Around noon, he saw her emerge from the back door, still wrapped in the blanket, making her way carefully across the frozen yard. She stopped at the well, drew water, stood for a moment looking out at the vista of hills and sky. The wind caught her hair, brown shot through with gold, pulling it free from the loose bun she'd fashioned. She was pretty, he realized, not in the obvious way of saloon girls or town belles, but in something quieter. The way she held her head, the determined set of her shoulders despite everything. She must have sensed him watching because she turned, caught his eye across the distance. Neither waved, neither smiled, but something passed between them. An acknowledgement, maybe. Two damaged people recognizing each other across the divide of loss. She went back inside, and he returned to his work. The day passed like that, in parallel lives that occasionally intersected. She brought him coffee mid-afternoon, better than his usual brew, though he didn't comment on it. He brought in firewood without being asked, stacking it high beside the stove. They moved around each other like dancers who'd forgotten the steps, careful not to touch. As evening approached, Ethan found himself on the hill behind the house. He hadn't meant to come here, but his feet knew the path too well. Two headstones stood side by side, carved with names that still burned in his throat. Sarah Rain, beloved wife. Emma Rain, cherished daughter. He didn't bring flowers anymore, didn't talk to them like he had those first crazy months. Now he just stood, hands shoved deep in his pockets, watching the sun sink toward the mountains. Mr. Rain. He turned to find Ruth standing a respectful distance away, that blanket still clutched around her shoulders like armor. "Didn't mean to intrude," she said quickly. "I just wanted to tell you supper's ready. When you are, be there directly." She started to go, then stopped. They were beautiful names, Sarah and Emma. His throat tightened. "How did you?" "Saw them carved on a wooden box in the kitchen." "I'm sorry. I wasn't snooping." "It's all right." And strangely, it was, usually. Any mention of their names sent him into a black mood that lasted days. But standing here with this strange, bruised girl, it felt different somehow. Sarah loved flowers, planted them everywhere. Used to say she was going to turn this whole hillside into a garden. What stopped her? Me, mostly. Said it wasn't practical. Said flowers don't put food on the table or money in the bank. He laughed, short and bitter. Spent 5 years wishing I'd let her plant every damn flower in the territory. Ruth moved closer, still maintaining that careful distance. "And Emma?" 4 years old, afraid of horses, which was a considerable problem on a ranch. Sarah used to say she'd grow out of it. He paused. "Guess we'll never know." They stood in silence as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of fire. The irony wasn't lost on him. "I had a sister," Ruth said suddenly. "Catherine, younger than me. She died of fever when she was 12. I still sometimes forget she's gone. Still turn to tell her something and remember." "How long?" 6 years. "Does it get easier?" She considered this. "No, just different, like a broken bone that heals wrong. You learn to walk around it." They made their way back down the hill as darkness gathered. The house glowed with lamplight, warm and welcoming in a way it hadn't been in years. She'd done that somehow, in just one day. Made it look like a home instead of a tomb. Supper was simple beans and cornbread, the last of the preserved vegetables from the root cellar. But it was hot and seasoned right, and Ethan found himself eating with actual appetite for the first time in recent memory. "Tell me about the ranch." Ruth said, "When it was working." So he did. Told her about the cattle drives, the spring roundups, the way the grass looked in summer when it rippled like a green ocean. Told her about the horses he'd bred, the reputation he'd built, the plans he'd had for expansion. "Why did you stop?" He pushed his plate away. Didn't see the point anymore. Ranch like this needs a reason, a future. Without that, he shrugged. "You could start again." Could, but his tone said he wouldn't. Ruth began clearing the table, and he noticed how she favored her left side. Ribs. Probably, maybe worse. "There's liniment in the barn," he said. "For the horses, but it works on people too. Might help with the pain." She stilled. "I'm fine." "No, you're not." But that's your business. Offer stands if you change your mind. Later, after she'd retired to her room, Ethan sat by the dying fire, nursing a glass of whiskey. The house felt different with her in it. Fuller. The silence had the texture now. Wasn't just empty space, but space waiting to be filled. He thought about the way she'd stood on that hill, looking at the graves without pity or false comfort. The way she'd said his daughter's name like it was still a name that belonged in the world. Outside, wind rattled the windows, and he heard the distant howl of wolves in the hills. Winter was far from over. The roads would be treacherous, the town gossips vicious, and whatever she was running from might still be chasing. But for tonight, there was food in his belly that didn't taste of char and regret. There was someone else's breathing in his house. There was the memory of golden hair catching sunlight and green eyes that understood broken bones that healed wrong. Ethan drained his glass and headed for bed, but not before stopping at the kitchen door. The wooden box sat on the shelf where it always had, carved with Sarah's initials. Inside were photographs, Emma's baby shoes, a ribbon from Sarah's hair, the deed to the ranch with both their names on it. He touched the box gently, like a benediction or a goodbye, then climbed the stairs to his empty bed. Through the thin walls, he could hear Ruth moving about, the creak of floorboards as she paced, still nervous, still ready to run. He understood that too. The difference was, he'd stopped running 5 years ago, stopped doing much of anything except existing. Maybe that was about to change. Maybe it already had. A week passed in careful rhythms. Ruth woke before dawn, had coffee ready when Ethan came in from checking the horses. They ate breakfast in companionable silence, then went their separate ways him to the endless repairs the ranch demanded. Her to wage war against 5 years of neglect inside the house. She attacked the dirt and disarray like it had personally offended her. Windows that hadn't been cleaned since Sarah died now sparkled in the winter sun. Floors emerged from under layers of dust. She even managed to coax the temperamental stove into proper working order, though Ethan suspected that had more to do with her stubborn will than any mechanical skill. They developed a language of distance and small kindnesses. He'd find fresh coffee waiting when he came in cold from mending fences. She'd discover the wood box filled without having to ask. Neither commented on these things. They simply happened, like frost forming on windows or sun rising over hills. But living in the same space meant walls couldn't hold forever. It was Thursday morning when Ethan found her standing frozen in the parlor doorway, dust rag clutched in white-knuckled hands. He'd avoided that room for 5 years, keeping the door closed like a seal on a tomb. "I didn't know," she said without turning. "I just thought it needed cleaning like everything else." He moved behind her, saw what had stopped her cold. The room was exactly as it had been that night, Sarah's sewing still in her basket by the chair, Emma's wooden blocks scattered on the rug. Even the book Sarah had been reading to Emma lay open on the side table, marking their place in a story that would never be finished. "I couldn't," he said simply. Couldn't go in, couldn't change anything. Like if I left it alone, they might." He stopped. The words sounded foolish even in his head. "Come back," Ruth finished softly. "I understand." She stepped into the room, movements careful as if entering a shrine. Her fingers ghosted over the back of Sarah's chair, not quite touching. "Tell me about her, Sarah." Ethan remained in the doorway, unable to cross that threshold. "She was everything I wasn't, warm where I was cold, always laughing, always seeing the best in things. Used to drive me half mad with her optimism." "How did you meet?" "Her father brought her out from St. Louis, trying to marry her off to some rancher's son 2 counties over. Their wagon broke an axle near my south pasture. I helped fix it." He almost smiled at the memory. "She said I looked like a scarecrow that learned to scowl. Said it right to my face, this little slip of a girl in a yellow dress." "What did you say back?" "Nothing. Couldn't think of a damn thing. Just stood there like a fool while she laughed." He was quiet for a moment. 3 months later, I married her. Her father never forgave me for stealing his meal ticket. Ruth moved to the window, looking out at the empty garden beds. She was happy here. Said she was, even when times got hard. When the cattle prices dropped and we were eating beans for weeks on end. She'd just smile and say at least we had a view with our beans. And Emma, little tornado, that one, into everything, curious about everything. Sarah used to say she got that from me, but I know better. That was all her mother. His throat tightened. She was learning her letters. We'd practice at night after supper. She could write her name, E-M-M-A. Used to write it in the dirt with sticks, proud as could be. Ruth turned from the window, and he saw tears on her face. Not the pretty tears of sentiment, but the real kind that came from understanding loss. We should clean it, she said, not throw things away, but clean it. They wouldn't want dust on their memories. I can't. I'll do it. You don't have to watch, but this room should honor them, not imprison them. He left her to it, fleeing to the barn like a coward, but as he worked, he could hear her through the open windows, singing, some hymn he half-remembered from his mother's kitchen. The sound drifted across the yard like a benediction, like something Sarah would have done. When he finally ventured back for lunch, the parlor door stood open. The room was clean. Everything in its place, but somehow different, lighter. The windows were open despite the cold, letting in fresh air and winter sun. Emma's blocks were neatly stacked on their shelf. Sarah's sewing was folded in its basket. The book was closed, a ribbon marking the page. Ruth was in the kitchen, heating soup, her face composed but eyes red-rimmed. "Thank you," he said roughly. "They were loved," she said. "The room shows it, every corner, that kind of love. It should be remembered, not hidden." They ate in silence, but it was different from their usual quiet. Fuller, like something had shifted between them, some barrier wearing thin. That afternoon, she ventured outside for the first time since arriving. He watched from the barn as she explored the immediate yard, still moving carefully but with more confidence. She found Sarah's garden beds under the snow, the fence Emma used to hang on while watching the horses. She spent a long time at the well, looking out across the land with an expression he couldn't read. As the sun began its descent, she approached the barn where he was repairing tack. "Could I see the horses?" He set down the bridle he'd been working on. "You said you could ride." "I can, or could. It's been a while." He led her into the barn's warmth, where 5 horses dozed in their stalls. She went to each one, holding out her hand, letting them sniff and decide. When she reached the last stall, a bay mare with a white star on her forehead, both woman and horse went still. "That's Molly," Ethan said. "Gentle as they come. Sarah's horse." Ruth's hand found the mare's neck, stroking gently. Molly leaned into the touch, wickering soft and low. "She's lonely," Ruth said. "Aren't we all?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. Ruth looked at him across the barn's dusty light, something shifting in her expression. "Yes," she said simply, "we are." That evening, she made something special for supper, found ingredients he'd forgotten he had, worked some kind of kitchen magic that filled the house with scents of herbs and baking. They ate by lamplight while wind howled outside, winter reminding them it wasn't done yet. "I've been thinking," Ruth said, pushing food around her plate. "About the town. About finding work." "Already told you." "I know what you told me, but I can't hide here forever. People will talk more if I never show my face." She was right, and he knew it. Ember Creek thrived on gossip, and a woman living unmarried with the hermit rancher would feed those fires for months. "We could go Saturday," he said finally. "Market day. Plenty of people around. Safety in numbers." "Together. Unless you'd rather go alone." "No." The word came quick, No, together would be better. Later, as she cleaned dishes and he tended the fire, she said, "The bruises are fading." He glanced over, saw it was true. The purple had gone greenish-yellow, the swelling down, in the lamplight, with color in her cheeks from good food and warm shelter. She looked almost whole. "Ruth," he said, then stopped. What right did he have to ask? What good would knowing do? "You want to know who did it?" Not a question. "Only if you want to tell." She dried the last plate with careful precision, hung the towel on its hook. When she turned, her chin was up, that stubborn pride in full force. "My father, well, the man who calls himself that, Judge Marcus Wells of Denver, pillar of the community, respected man of law." Her voice was bitter as winter wind. "Also, a man who believes daughters are property to be sold to the highest bidder. When I refused his choice of husband, a man 3 times my age with wandering hands, he decided to convince me otherwise." Ethan's hands clenched into fists. "Your mother, dead these 10 years. There's no one to stop him? No one who'd believe me over a judge?" She touched her jaw where the worst bruise was fading. "So I ran, took what money I could find and ran. Changed trains 3 times. Got as far as my money would take me, which was here." "He'll come looking." "Maybe, probably. But he's proud, too. Might decide a runaway daughter is less embarrassing than a manhunt." She met his eyes steady on. "If he does come, I won't bring trouble to your door. I'll move on." "Will you?" The question surprised them both. She looked away. "That's what I should do." "Not what I asked." The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken things. "Finally," she said, "I'm tired of running, tired of being afraid, tired of being alone. So no, Mr. Rain, if I'm honest, I don't want to move on, but wanting and doing right don't always match up." "Ethan," he said, "if we're being honest, might as well use my name." "Ethan," she tested it, like tasting new food. "All right, Ethan." He stood, suddenly restless. The kitchen felt too small, too warm, too full of possibilities he hadn't allowed himself to consider. "I'm going to check the horses," he said. "It's past 9. You already checked them. May might check them again." He grabbed his coat and escaped into the cold clarity of night. The stars were brilliant overhead, the kind of display that only came with winter clear. His breath clouded in the air as he walked not to the barn but past it, up the hill to where Sarah and Emma lay. "I don't know what I'm doing," he told the silent stones. "She's hurt and running and needs help. That's all this is. That's all it can be." The wind whispered through the dried grass, and he almost imagined Sarah's laugh in it. She'd always been able to see through his nonsense. When he returned to the house, Ruth had already retired, but there was fresh coffee on the stove and a plate of cookies he hadn't known she'd made sitting on the table. Small kindnesses, the kind that could undo a man if he let them. He took a cookie and climbed to his room, pausing at her door. Light spilled from underneath, and he could hear the soft whisper of pages turning. She'd found books somewhere, probably the ones Sarah had collected. For a moment, he stood there, hand raised to knock. To say what? "Good night, thank you, something else entirely." He let his hand fall and continued to his room. Some distances were meant to be kept. Some walls were all that stood between safety and a hurt worse than what had come before. But as he lay in his cold bed, listening to her move about her room, he wondered if safety was worth the price of it. Wondered if Sarah would shake her head at him, building walls where she would have built bridges. Outside, the wind howled its lonely song, and somewhere in the darkness, wolves called to each other across the vast emptiness. At least they had each other to answer back. The dream woke her before dawn, as it had every night since she'd arrived. Her father's voice, cold as courthouse marble, echoing through dark hallways. The sound of heavy footsteps climbing stairs. The doorknob turning, turning, turning. Ruth sat up gasping, heart hammering against her ribs. Gray light leaked through the curtains. Somewhere below. She heard the familiar sounds of Ethan moving through his morning routine. Real sounds. Safe sounds. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, needing the ordinary ritual of morning coffee to chase away the shadows. But when she entered the kitchen, Ethan wasn't alone. An older man sat at the table, weathered face creased with concern. He looked up when she entered, and his eyes widened slightly, whether at her presence or the fading bruises. She couldn't tell. "Ruth," Ethan said, voice carefully neutral. "This is Ben Cooper, owns the spread next to mine. Ben, this is Ruth. She's helping with the house." Ben stood, touched his hat brim politely. "Ma'am." His eyes flickered between them, clearly drawing conclusions. "Just stopped by to let Ethan know there's been wolf trouble. Found 2 of my calves yesterday, torn up bad." "Wolves don't usually come down this far," Ethan said, pouring coffee for Ruth without being asked. The casual domesticity of the gesture wasn't lost on any of them. "Hard winter," Ben replied. "Pushes everything to desperate measures." He paused, studying Ruth with kind eyes. "You're the young lady from the train last week. Heard Jake Harmon was giving you trouble." Ruth's hand tightened on her coffee cup. "Mr. Rain was kind enough to intervene." Ethan's good at that, intervening. There was weight to Ben's words. History she didn't understand. "My wife Martha would love to meet you, Miss Ruth. Gets lonely for female company out here." "That's kind, but—" "Sunday dinner." Ben continued, gentle but insistent. "Nothing fancy. Just neighbors being neighborly." Ethan shifted beside her, and she could feel his tension. "Ben, 2 o'clock. Martha won't take no for an answer, and you know it." Ben set his hat firmly on his head. "Good to meet you, Miss Ruth. Ethan, watch for those wolves. They're bold this year." After he left, the kitchen felt smaller somehow. Ruth busied herself with breakfast preparations, aware of Ethan watching her. "You don't have to go," he said finally. "To the Coopers." "Will it cause more talk if I don't?" "There's already talk." She cracked eggs into a bowl, whisking perhaps more vigorously than necessary. "What are they saying?" "The usual. That I've taken up with a loose woman. That you're running from the law. That I finally lost what was left of my mind." He paused. That last one might be true. Despite everything, she almost smiled. "Which would be worse for your reputation, being thought mad or being thought human?" "Been so long, I don't remember the difference." They ate breakfast in their usual quiet, but Ruth's mind churned. She'd known the isolation couldn't last, but facing the reality of other people, other eyes, other judgments, it sat heavy in her stomach. "I need to see them," she said suddenly. Ethan looked up from his plate. "Who?" "Your family. Sarah and Emma. I need to see where they rest." Something shifted in his face. Without a word, he stood and fetched his coat from the peg. She followed him out into the crisp morning air, up the familiar path she'd watched him walk each evening. The graves sat on the prettiest part of the hill, facing east toward the sunrise. The headstones were simple but well made, carved with care. Someone, Ethan, she realized, had cleared the snow away, keeping the space neat despite his claims of letting everything go. "Ben helped me dig them," Ethan said quietly. "Wouldn't let me do it alone. Said no man should have to dig his family's graves by himself." Ruth knelt between the 2 stones, her skirt spreading on the frozen ground. She traced Emma's name with 1 finger, thinking of the blocks in the parlor, the little girl who'd been learning her letters. Why did he do it, the man who set the fire? Josiah Mills. I'd caught him altering brands, stealing cattle, fired him, threatened to go to the sheriff. He got drunk, decided to teach me a lesson. Ethan's voice was steady, but she heard the fault lines in it. "Didn't mean to kill them. He said, just wanted to burn the barn. Cost me money. Didn't know the wind would shift. Sent sparks to the house. Didn't know Sarah would go back for Emma's doll. Ruth closed her eyes, seeing it too clearly. A mother's instinct to save what her child loved. A moment's choice that changed everything. He tried to run when he saw what happened. Horse threw him not half a mile from here. Ben found him at sunrise, neck broken clean through. Ethan's laugh was bitter as winter wind. Everyone said it was justice, like that would bring them back. Is that why you stopped the ranch? I mean, what was the point built all this for them, without them? He gestured at the vista of dormant land. Just dirt and grass and empty spaces. Ruth stood, brushing snow from her skirts. They wouldn't want that. This stopping? How would you know what they'd want? Because I've seen their home, seen how every corner speaks of love and life and plans for the future. People who live like that don't believe in giving up. She met his eyes steady on. And because you tend their graves every day, even when you claim not to care about anything. He turned away, but not before she saw something crack in his expression. We should get back. Work to do. But as they walked down the hill, he said, the wolves Ben mentioned, they'll get bolder, especially if they've tasted blood. You shouldn't wander far from the house alone. I won't. I mean it. Ruth. Desperate creatures do desperate things. She wondered if he was talking about wolves at all. That afternoon, while Ethan worked on repairing the chicken coop that had stood empty for years, Ruth found herself drawn to the small study off the parlor. Like everything else, it had been closed up, forgotten. But unlike the parlor, this room held Ethan's past, not Sarah's. Maps covered one wall, marked with cattle trails and water sources. Ledgers lined the shelves, recording years of successful ranching. And in the desk drawer, wrapped in oilcloth, she found something that made her heart skip. Photographs, not the formal portraits she'd expected, but casual moments captured by some traveling photographer. Ethan, younger and less weathered, actually smiling as Sarah leaned against him. Emma on his shoulders, hands buried in his hair, mouth open in delighted laughter. Sarah by her garden, dirt on her hands and joy on her face. But it was the last photo that held her. Ethan alone, standing by a corral full of horses, the pride in his stance, the satisfaction in his expression. This was a man who'd known his place in the world, who'd built something worth having. You shouldn't be in here. She spun, photos scattering. Ethan stood in the doorway, face unreadable. I'm sorry, No. He moved into the room, knelt to gather the pictures. It's all right, just wasn't expecting. His hands stilled on the photo of him with the horses. Ruth knelt beside him, helping collect the scattered memories. You were happy? She said softly. I was complete. He wrapped the photos carefully, returned them to their drawer. There's a difference. Could you be again complete? He stood, offering her a hand up. His palm was rough with calluses, warm despite the cold. Some things you don't come back from. Ruth, you just learn to live around them. Like a broken bone that heals wrong. You remembered? I remember everything you tell me. They stood close in the small room, her hand still in his. The air felt charged, like the moment before lightning strikes. Then he dropped her hand, stepped back, the walls sliding back into place. Storm coming in, he said. Need to secure the barn. She watched him go, then looked back at the desk. In her other hand, she still held one photo Sarah in her garden, face tilted toward the sun. Ruth studied the woman who'd held Ethan's heart, who'd made this house a home, who'd died trying to save what mattered most. I'm not trying to replace you, she whispered to the image. I'm just trying to help him remember he's still alive. That evening, as the promised storm rolled in, they worked together to prepare. Shutters latched, animals secured, firewood stacked high. The wind picked up as darkness fell, howling around the corners of the house like something trying to get in. They ate by lamplight, the electricity in the air making even ordinary conversation feel weighted. Ruth told him about finding the ledgers, asked about the ranch's better days. He answered carefully at first, then with growing animation as memories surfaced. Had near 300 head at the peak, he said. Good stock, too. Longhorns crossed with eastern breeds. Hardy but meaty. Used to drive them to Denver twice a year. You could again. Take money to start, hands to work, and for what? To prove something to an empty house. Thunder crashed overhead, and Ruth jumped. Ethan's hand moved instinctively toward hers across the table, stopped inches away. Just the storm, he said. I know. She wrapped her arms around herself. Storms always made me feel small, like God was reminding us how little control we really have. Sarah loved them, said they washed the world clean. Another crack of thunder, and this time the lamp flickered. In the brief darkness, she felt rather than saw him move. When the light steadied, he was beside her chair. Come on, he said. Better view from the parlor. She followed him to the room that still felt like sacred space. He lit the fire, and they settled into chairs in what had clearly been his spot. Her across from him where Sarah must have sat. The storm raged outside, but the fire made a circle of warmth and light. Tell me about Judge Wells, Ethan said suddenly. Ruth's hands clenched in her lap. Why? Because you jump at thunder but stood steady when Jake Harmon threatened you. Because you watch every door like you expect someone to come through it. Because if he's coming, I need to know what we're facing. We're such a small word to carry so much weight. He's powerful, she said finally. Connected. Has friends in high places and low. He wanted me to marry Harrison Pike, owns half the banks in Denver. Said it would cement his political future. And you said no. I said more than that. I said it in front of witnesses at a dinner party. She stared into the fire. He waited until the guests were gone. Then he showed me what happened to daughters who embarrassed their fathers. Ethan's jaw tightened. There's law against that, even for judges. His law, his town, his word against mine. She met his eyes. So I ran, like a coward. Like a survivor. Nothing cowardly about saving yourself. My mother would have stayed, would have found a way to manage him, work around him. Your mother's dead. You're not. Seems like you made the right choice. Lightning illuminated the room, throwing shadows that danced like ghosts. In that brief, white moment, she saw him clearly, the pain he carried. Yes, but also the strength that endured despite it. What will you do if he comes? She asked. What needs doing? That's not an answer. It's the only one I've got. They sat in silence as the storm spent its fury. The fire burned lower, casting softer light. Ruth found herself drowsy despite the thunder, safe in this room that had known such love and loss. I should go up, she said, not moving. Stay until the storm passes. So she did, curling deeper into the chair as rain lashed the windows. She must have dozed, because suddenly Ethan was adding wood to the fire, moving quiet as a shadow. What time is it? She asked. Late. Storm's moving off. He stood by her chair, looking down with an expression she couldn't read. You were smiling. In your sleep. Was I? Don't remember. Sarah used to do that. Said her dreams were better than her days, and her days were pretty good. Do you dream of them? Sometimes. Less than I used to. Started dreaming of other things lately. The weight of what he didn't say hung between them. Ruth uncurled from the chair, stood so close she could see the gold flecks in his brown eyes. Ethan. Don't! The word was rough. Please, just don't! She nodded, understanding. Some distances needed to be traveled slowly, carefully, or not at all. Good night, then. Good night, Ruth. As she climbed the stairs to her room, She thought about broken bones and how they healed, about storms that washed the world clean, about a man who tended graves and empty chicken coops with equal care, who was learning to speak in the present tense again. Through her window, she could see the storm moving east, lightning flickering in the distance like a promise or a threat. Tomorrow would bring Sunday dinner with neighbors, curious eyes and careful questions. Tomorrow would bring whatever tomorrow brought. But tonight, she'd sat by a fire in a room full of ghosts and felt, for just a moment, like she belonged. The fever came on sudden, like spring snow in the territories, unexpected and fierce. One moment Ruth was hanging laundry on the line, fighting the March wind for possession of Ethan's work shirts. The next, the ground tilted sideways, and she found herself on her knees in the dead grass, shivering despite the unseasonably warm afternoon. She tried to stand, managed it on the second attempt. The house seemed miles away, wavering like a mirage in her blurred vision. Each step was an act of will, her body burning and freezing by turns. Somehow she made it to the kitchen door, fumbling with the latch. Her fingers felt thick, clumsy as winter gloves. When the door finally opened, she nearly sobbed with relief. "Just need to lie down," she told the empty kitchen. Her voice sounded strange, hollow in her own ears. Just for a moment. The stairs to her room might as well have been a mountain. She stood at the bottom, gripping the banister, watching them multiply and dance in her fever-bright vision. No, too far, too hard. The parlor, Sarah's chair by the cold fireplace. She stumbled toward it, each step a negotiation with her failing body. Almost there. Almost. The floor rushed up to meet her. She had a moment to think how cool the wood felt against her burning cheek, how strange that she could see dust motes dancing in the afternoon light. Then darkness swept in like a merciful tide. Ethan found her 3 hours later. He'd been working the east fence line, farther from the house than usual. Something had been nagging at him all day, a restlessness he couldn't name. When he finally gave in to it and headed back early, the sight of laundry half hung on the line, shirts flapping like surrender flags, sent ice through his veins. Ruth. The kitchen was empty, but the door stood open, letting in flies and dust. Not like her. She was careful about such things, precise in her habits. "Ruth!" He found her in the parlor, crumpled beside Sarah's chair like a dropped doll. For one terrible moment, memory and present collided. Another woman, another still form, another moment of finding what he couldn't bear to lose. But Ruth was burning, not cold. Her skin felt like sun-heated stone when he touched her face, alive, sick but alive. "Ruth, can you hear me?" Her eyelids fluttered, revealed fever-glazed green. "Ethan," the word was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry about the laundry, the wind." "Hush, none of that matters." He gathered her up, shocked again at how little she weighed. She'd gained some since arriving, but under it all was still that bird-bone fragility. Her head lolled against his shoulder, and she murmured something he couldn't catch. The stairs he'd climbed alone for 5 years felt different with her in his arms. At the landing, he hesitated. Her room with its narrow bed. Or, "Cold?" she whispered. "So cold." His room, then. His bed with its wider mattress, its proximity to the chimney that shared warmth from the kitchen stove below. He laid her on top of the quilts, then hesitated again. Her dress was damp with fever sweat, her boots still laced tight. "Ruth, I need to—" "You need dry clothes." She nodded, or he thought she did. Her eyes were closed, body shaking with chills despite the fever. He found her nightgown in her room, worked as quickly and respectfully as possible to change her clothes, keeping his eyes on the wall, on the ceiling, anywhere but on the pale skin marked with old bruises and new fragility. When she was settled under the quilts, he built up the fire in the kitchen stove, then fetched water and clean cloths. The doctor was 15 miles away in Ember Creek, Too far with night coming on and her in this state. He'd have to manage alone. The hours blurred together. Ruth drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes knowing him, sometimes calling for people he didn't know. Her mother, mostly, once, terrifyingly. She cowered away from him, seeing her father in his face. "Please," she begged the man who wasn't there. "I'll be good. I'll marry him. Just please." "It's me," Ethan said, keeping his voice low, soothing. "It's Ethan. You're safe." Her eyes focused briefly. "Ethan." She reached for his hand, gripped it with surprising strength. "Don't let him take me back." "Never." "Promise. I promise." She settled then, but didn't release his hand. He sat on the edge of the bed, thumb moving in small circles on her wrist, and watched her fight battles he couldn't see. Midnight came and went. He changed the cool cloths on her forehead, coaxed water between her cracked lips when she'd take it. The fever raged on, turning her skin translucent, making her bones stand out sharp as winter branches. This was how Ben found them at dawn, Ethan still in yesterday's clothes, sitting vigil beside his bed where Ruth lay fighting for each breath. "Saw your smoke early," Ben said from the doorway. Figured something was wrong. He took in the scene, understanding immediately. "How long?" "Found her yesterday afternoon. Fever won't break." "I'll fetch Doc Hartley." "Ben..." "Don't argue. Martha's coming too." "You look about ready to drop yourself." Ethan wanted to protest, but Ruth chose that moment to convulse with chills, teeth chattering so hard he feared they'd break. He pulled the quilts higher, tucked them around her shoulders, and found Ben watching with knowing eyes. "Go," Ethan said roughly. The morning crawled by in fragments, Ruth's labored breathing, the clock ticking, his own heartbeat loud in his ears. She talked in her delirium, snippets of a life he'd only glimpsed, a piano recital where she'd forgotten the piece, a dog named Chester who died when she was 12, her mother singing lullabies in French. "Mama says ladies don't run," she told him earnestly, eyes wide but unseeing. "But sometimes we have to, don't we? Sometimes staying is worse than being improper." "Yes," he agreed, smoothing damp hair back from her forehead. "Sometimes running is the bravest thing." She smiled at that, the first peace he'd seen on her face in hours. Then the fever seized her again, and she was lost to him, whimpering with pain she couldn't name. He'd never prayed much after Sarah and Emma died. What was the point of talking to a God who'd let that happen but sitting there, watching Ruth struggle for each breath? He found himself bargaining with whatever might be listening. "Not her," he whispered. "Not again. Take the ranch. Take the cattle. Take whatever you want, but not her." The sound of horses in the yard brought him to the window. Doc Hartley's familiar buggy, with Ben riding alongside. Behind them, Martha Cooper drove her own wagon, loaded with what looked like half her pantry. Ethan met them at the door, and Martha took one look at him and shook her head. "Ben Cooper, you should have come for me last night. Look at this man, dead on his feet." She pushed past them all, heading for the kitchen. "Where is she?" "Upstairs, my room." If Martha found anything scandalous in that, she didn't show it. "Good, warmer there. Doctor, you go on up. Ethan, you sit down before you fall down. Ben, fetch more water." They scattered to their tasks, Martha's no-nonsense presence filling the house like sunrise. Ethan found himself at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee appearing in front of him like magic. "Drink," Martha ordered. "When's the last time you ate?" He couldn't remember. Yesterday morning, the day blurred with the night, time meaningless except for counting Ruth's breaths. "That's what I thought." Martha was already at his stove, bacon sizzling in a pan. "You can't help her if you collapse. She's going to need you when this breaks." "If it breaks..." Martha turned, fixed him with eyes that had seen plenty of frontier hardship. "When..." That girl's got steel in her spine. I saw it that first Sunday she came to dinner, the way she held her head up despite the whole town talking. She's not giving up now. Doc Hartley came down then, rolling his sleeves back. He was younger than his predecessor, maybe 40, with the tired eyes of a man who'd seen too much death for his years. Fever's high, but her lungs are clear. That's good. No pneumonia setting in. He accepted coffee from Martha with a grateful nod. It's exhaustion as much as anything. Body's been running on fear and will for too long. And now that she's safe, it's collecting its due. Will she? Ethan couldn't finish the question. Can't say for certain, but she's young, and you've been doing all the right things. Cool cloths, fluids when she'll take them. Now we wait. See if her body's stronger than what's attacking it. The doctor left medicines, instructions, promises to return if needed. Ben headed back to tend both ranches' stock, and Martha settled in like she'd been invited for a long stay. You need sleep, she told Ethan. I'll sit with her. I can't. You can and will. 2 hours. Then you can relieve me. Her voice gentled. She's going to need you whole. Ethan Rain, not worn down to nothing. Sarah would tell you the same if she could. The mention of Sarah from anyone else would have sent him into a black rage. From Martha, who'd been Sarah's friend, who'd helped prepare the bodies for burial. It was oddly comforting. He climbed the stairs, stood in his doorway watching Ruth sleep. Martha had settled in the chair he'd dragged beside the bed, already pulling out her knitting. Ruth looked smaller somehow, lost in his big bed, face flushed with fever. 2 hours, Martha said without looking up. I'll wake you if anything changes. Ethan stretched out on Ruth's narrow bed, smelling the lavender sachet she kept under her pillow. Sleep took him between one breath and the next, deep and dreamless. Martha woke him as promised, looking pleased. Fever's down a degree. She took some broth. Hope fluttered in his chest, fragile as a new-hatched bird. He returned to his vigil, noting the slight improvement in Ruth's color, the easier rhythm of her breathing. Evening came with its purple shadows. Martha left soup on the stove. Promises to return tomorrow. Ben stopped by with reports of all stock tended. Fences holding. The house settled into quiet again, just Ethan and Ruth and the whisper of wind outside. She woke properly near midnight, eyes focusing on his face with real recognition. Ethan, I'm here. I was in your bed. Confusion creased her forehead. How? You collapsed. Yesterday afternoon. Do you remember? She shook her head slightly, then winced. The laundry. I was hanging laundry. Gave me quite a scare, finding you on the parlor floor. I'm sorry. Stop apologizing. He helped her sit up enough to sip water, his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, too weak still for propriety. You've been sick, fever. Doc Hartley says it's exhaustion catching up with you. Have you been here all night? Of course I have. The words hung between them, weighted with meaning. Ruth's eyes filled with tears that spilled over before she could stop them. Hey now, Ethan said, awkward with her tears. None of that. You're going to be fine. No one ever... She stopped, took a shaky breath. When I was sick as a child, Father would send me to my room with a maid. Said illness was weakness, and weakness was ugly. Rage, hot and pure, flooded through him. What kind of man treated his own child that way? But he kept his voice gentle, his hand steady as it smoothed her hair. Well, he was wrong, and he's not here, just me, and I'm not going anywhere. She studied his face in the lamplight, and he realized how he must look unshaven, unwashed, still in yesterday's clothes. But she smiled, small and sweet, and reached up to touch his cheek. You look tired. I look like hell. No. Her hand was cool against his skin, the fever finally breaking. You look like someone who keeps promises. He caught her hand, held it between both of his, felt the calluses she'd developed from weeks of work, the strength beneath the fragility. "Rest now," he said. "I'll be right here." "In that chair all night." "Where else would I be?" She was quiet so long he thought she'd fallen asleep. Then, "Thank you." "For what?" "For finding me. For staying. For—" She yawned, exhaustion pulling her under again. "For making me believe in safe places again." Ethan sat in that chair through the rest of the night, her hand in his, watching her breathe. The fever broke completely near dawn, leaving her skin cool and damp. He changed the sweat-soaked sheets around her, helped her into a fresh nightgown with his eyes respectfully averted, settled her back into clean bedding. When the sun rose, painting the mountains gold, she was sleeping peacefully. Natural sleep now, healing and deep. He finally allowed himself to stretch out beside her on top of the quilts, still fully dressed, still keeping watch. He woke to fingers in his hair, gentle as butterfly wings. Ruth was propped on one elbow, studying him with those green eyes that saw too much. "You stayed," she said softly. "All night, both nights." "Oh, of course I did." "Why?" Such a simple question, such a complicated answer. Because he'd already lost too much to fever and fire. Because somewhere between that first night and this one, she'd become necessary. Because the thought of this house without her in it was worse than memories. "You know why," he said finally. "Tell me anyway." But he couldn't, not yet, not with her still pale from illness, still fragile as spring ice. Instead, he sat up, putting proper distance between them. "You need food, real food. Martha left soup." "Ethan—" "And a bath. You'll feel better after a bath. I'll heat water." He fled before she could push further, busying himself with the ordinary tasks of care. But he felt her eyes on him, patient as the land itself, waiting for him to find the words for what was growing between them. Soon, he thought, when she was well, when the fear of losing her wasn't so fresh, when he could think past the miracle of her breathing, her living, her staying. Soon. But not today. The rider came at sunset, 3 weeks after Ruth's fever broke. Ethan saw him first, a dark figure against the dying light, moving with the purposeful pace of a man on official business. Everything about him screamed law, from the straight-backed way he sat his horse to the badge glinting on his coat. "Ruth," Ethan called quietly from the doorway. "Get upstairs, now." She looked up from the bread she was kneading, flour dusting her hands. One glance at his face and she understood. The color drained from her cheeks, but she moved without panic, wiping her hands on her apron as she headed for the stairs. "The back room," he said. "Lock the door." "Ethan, go." She went, and he waited until he heard the lock click before stepping out onto the porch. The rider was closer now, and Ethan recognized the type, young, ambitious, wearing authority like a new suit. "Evening," the man called out, reining up just outside the yard. "This the Rain property?" "It is." "Name's Judson Hale, deputy marshal out of Denver." He dismounted with practiced ease, hand resting casual-like near his pistol. "Looking for someone. Thought you might have seen her." "Not many strangers come through here. This one's particular. Young woman, early 20s, brown hair, green eyes. Pretty thing, but troubled." Hale pulled out a photograph, held it where Ethan could see. Ruth, but younger, softer, before the bruises, before the running. Margaret Wells, Judge Marcus Wells' daughter. Been missing near 2 months now. Missing or running? Hale's eyes sharpened. "That's an interesting question. Mr. Rain." "Just wondering why a deputy marshal's looking for a missing girl. Unless she's wanted for something. Family matter. The judge is concerned for his daughter's well-being. She's delicate, prone to wild stories, needs her father's care." Ethan kept his face neutral, but rage simmered beneath. Delicate, wild stories. Pretty words for ugly truths. Haven't seen her, he said flatly. Mind if I look around long ride out here? Like to water my horse, at least. Wells over there. Help yourself. Hale took his time, letting his horse drink while his eyes catalogued everything. The laundry on the line, including a blue dress that was decidedly feminine. The garden plot that had been turned for spring planting. The curtains and windows that had been bare for years. Living alone, are you? Hale asked conversationally. Man's got a right to privacy on his own land. Sure. Just making conversation. He adjusted his hat, smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. Funny thing, though, stopped in town earlier. Folks there tell interesting stories about you taking in some woman off the train couple months back. Folks in town talk too much. Maybe, but they're observant. Shopkeeper remembered selling fabric to a young woman. Pretty thing, he said, bruised up some, paid with cash, didn't give a name. Ethan said nothing, just watched and waited. Men like Hale wanted you to fill the silence, give them something to grab onto. Here's what I think, Hale continued. I think Margaret Wells got some fool notion in her head, ran off, ended up here. I think you've been harboring her. Maybe not knowing who she really was. No crime in that. If you cooperate now. And if I don't, well now, that would be different. Interfering with a lawful investigation. Kidnapping, possibly. If the judge wants to push it. Man with your history can't afford that kind of trouble. My history? Oh, I know all about you. Rain, the fire, your family, the man who died after. Some might say you've got a taste for violence. Add a young woman to that story. He spread his hands. Let the threat hang. The kitchen door opened before Ethan could respond. Ruth stepped out, head high, every inch the judge's daughter despite the simple dress and work-worn hands. That's enough, Mr. Hale. Hale's satisfaction was obvious. Miss Wells, your father's been worried sick. Has he? How touching. Her voice could have cut glass. I suppose he's worried about the scandal? A daughter who won't be sold to the highest bidder. How embarrassing for him. Now, Miss Wells. My name is Ruth. She moved to stand beside Ethan, not quite touching but close enough to make a statement. And I'm not going back. You're not well. Your father explained about your episodes. These delusions. The only delusion was thinking my father would change. She pushed up her sleeve, revealed the shadow of old bruises. Or are these delusions too? Hale's expression didn't change. Could have happened anywhere. You've been gone 2 months, living with a man who's not your husband. No telling what's been done to you. The insinuation was clear. Ethan took a step forward, but Ruth's hand on his arm stopped him. Mister, Rain has shown me nothing but kindness and respect, which is more than I can say for my father or his friends. She lifted her chin. I'm of age. Mr. Hale. Free to go where I please. Your father sees it different. You're unmarried, living under his authority until such time as a husband takes over. That's the law. Then I'll marry. The words dropped like stones in still water. Ethan turned to stare at her, but she kept her eyes on Hale. I'll marry Mr. Rain. Today, if necessary. Then I'll be under my husband's authority, not my father's. That's also the law. Isn't it? Hale's jaw worked like he was chewing something bitter. A forced marriage. Who's forcing anyone? Ruth's smile was sharp as winter ice. Ethan, will you marry me? He understood what she was doing, using the very laws that trapped her to set herself free. It was brave and desperate and probably foolish. But looking at her fierce and frightened and absolutely determined, he knew his answer. Yes. There. Engaged. And once we're married, my father has no claim on me. Unless you're suggesting a husband can't protect his wife from unwanted visitors. Hale's hand moved toward his gun. Now see here. I'd think real careful about that next move. Ben Cooper's voice came from the barn shadows. He stepped into view, rifle cradled easy in his arms. Evening. Ethan, Ruth. Saw a stranger heading this way. Thought I'd check on my neighbors. Ben. Ethan acknowledged, not taking his eyes off Hale. Good timing. Martha's with me, in the house, making tea. You know Martha hospitable to a fault, already planning the wedding. I'd wager. Tomorrow, she says, after church, Reverend Michaels will be happy to officiate. Hale looked between them all, calculating odds. A respected rancher, his wife, the local reverend witnesses that would be hard to discredit. This isn't over, he said finally. The judge has resources, influence. And I have a shotgun, Ethan said mildly, which counts for more out here. You're making a mistake. Miss Wells, your father only wants what's best. My father wants a business arrangement that benefits him. He can find another daughter to sell. Ruth's voice was steady, but Ethan could see the tremor in her hands. Tell him I'm dead if it makes it easier. Margaret Wells died the night she ran. There's only Ruth here. Martha appeared in the doorway then, all motherly concern and steel spine. Goodness, all this fuss. Come inside. Deputy, have some tea before your long ride back. It was brilliantly done. Martha's aggressive hospitality left no room for threats or violence. Hale found himself herded inside, served tea and cookies, while Ben's rifle stayed conveniently visible. They kept up bright chatter about wedding plans, the spring planting, anything but the reason he'd come. Finally, Hale escaped to his horse. He mounted up, gave Ethan one last hard look. The judge won't give up easy. He's got pride. So do I, Ethan replied, and I've got more to lose. They watched him ride away until he was just a speck in the darkness. Only then did Ruth sag against the porch rail, all that fierce courage draining away. Oh God, what have I done? What you had to, Martha said firmly. Ben, stop looking like you swallowed a frog. Ethan, get this girl inside before she falls over. The kitchen felt too bright after the darkness outside. Ruth sank into a chair, hands pressed to her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I couldn't think of anything else. Nothing to be sorry for, Ethan said. You did what was needed. But I've trapped you, forced you into ways. Nobody forces me into anything. He crouched beside her chair, waited until she looked at him. We'll figure this out. The marriage, it doesn't have to be real, just legal enough to keep you safe. The judge will check. He's thorough. If we don't, she flushed, looked away. If it's not consummated, he could have it annulled. Martha cleared her throat. What Ruth needs now is rest and a wedding dress. Lucky I've got my own stored away. Should fit with some taking in. Ben, we'll stay the night, just in case that deputy gets any ideas about coming back. They bustled around, making arrangements, filling the silence with practical matters. But Ethan saw the fear in Ruth's eyes, the weight of what she'd done settling on her shoulders. Later, after the Coopers had settled in the spare room, Ethan found Ruth on the porch, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the stars. You can still run, he said quietly. Ben knows ways through the mountains, could get you to California, Oregon, somewhere the judge won't think to look. Running's all I've done. I'm tired of it. She was quiet for a long moment. Are you angry? Why would I be angry? Because I've upended your life, brought trouble to your door, made promises for you without asking. He leaned against the rail beside her, close enough to feel her warmth. My life needed upending. Been standing still so long I'd started to grow roots. This isn't how marriage should happen. Not as a business transaction or legal maneuver. How should it happen? With love, with choosing each other because you can't imagine choosing anyone else. Her voice was wistful. My mother used to tell me about how my father courted her. Flowers every day, poetry, promises about their future together. What happened? She married him. Found out promises are just pretty words. She pulled the shawl tighter. He changed after the wedding, or maybe showed who he'd always been. By the time she realized, it was too late. She was trapped. You're not trapped. Wedding or no wedding, you want to leave. You leave. I'll help you go. She turned to look at him then, starlight catching in her eyes. What if I don't want to go? The question hung between them, delicate as spun glass. Ethan felt the pull of it, the possibility she was offering. But with Hale's threat still echoing and tomorrow's hasty wedding looming, he couldn't trust what was real and what was necessity. Ask me again, he said finally. When you're safe, when you're not choosing between me and your father. Ask me again when staying is a choice, not just the lesser evil. She nodded, understanding and disappointment warring in her expression. You're a good man, Ethan Rain. No, just a man who's learned the difference between choosing and being chosen. They stood together in the darkness. Two damaged souls about to bind themselves together for all the wrong reasons. Or maybe, Ethan thought, watching her profile against the stars, for the only reason that mattered: survival. Tomorrow they'd speak vows in front of God and witnesses. Tomorrow they'd sign papers that made her Ruth Rain instead of Margaret Wells. Tomorrow they'd begin a marriage born of desperation rather than desire. But tonight, they had this standing together on the porch of a house that had known real love once. Maybe it would again. Maybe the difference between a marriage of convenience and one of connection was just time and trust and the slow accumulation of shared mornings. Ethan? Ruth's voice was soft in the darkness. Yeah. Thank you for saying yes, for not making me beg or explain or justify. Just thank you. He reached out, covered her hand where it gripped the porch rail. Her fingers were cold, but they turned to lace with his, holding on like he was the only solid thing in a tilting world. We'll make it work, he promised. Whatever that means, however it looks, we'll make it work. She squeezed his hand, and they stood there until the cold drove them inside. Two people on the edge of a future neither had planned, but both were choosing, one desperate moment at a time. The morning after the wedding came soft and golden, nothing like the chaos of the day before. Ruth woke in the bed that was now officially hers to share, though Ethan had spent the night in his chair by the window, keeping watch. She'd protested, but he'd insisted habits of protection died hard, and with Hale's threats still fresh, neither felt safe enough for ordinary matrimonial arrangements. You're awake, Ethan said without turning from the window. Have you slept at all? Some. He stood, stretched muscles stiff from the awkward position. Coffee's ready downstairs. Ben's already taken care of the morning chores. She sat up, pulling the quilt around her shoulders. Mrs. Ethan Rain. The name felt foreign on her tongue, like trying on someone else's clothes. Yesterday's ceremony had been brief. Practical Reverend Michaels performing the basics while half the town watched from the pews, drawn by gossip about the deputy's visit. Any sign of Hale? No, but he'll be back, or someone like him. Your father won't give up after one attempt. Ruth knew he was right. Marcus Wells had never lost anything he considered his property, but that was tomorrow's worry. Today, she was a married woman in the eyes of the law, beyond her father's reach. She found Ethan in the kitchen, sleeves rolled up, hands deep in bread dough. It was such a domestic sight that she stopped in the doorway, struck by the strangeness of it all. Sarah taught me, he said, not looking up. Said a man should know how to feed himself proper. Never got the hang of it while she was alive. After, he shrugged, kept kneading. Lot of time to practice. I can do that. I know, but you cooked yesterday. And the day before. Figure marriage should mean sharing the work. She moved into the room, poured coffee from the pot. Is that what this is, marriage? His hand stilled on the dough. What else would you call it? I don't know. A legal arrangement, a shield, a convenience. She sat at the table, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. But not a marriage, not really. Real enough to keep you safe. Is that enough for you? He shaped the dough into a loaf with practiced motions, settled it in a pan to rise. When he finally looked at her, his expression was carefully neutral. For now, he said, rest we'll figure out as we go. They spent the morning in careful cooperation, learning to navigate around each other in this new reality. Ruth worked on mending while Ethan repaired harness in the barn. They met for lunch, ate in companionable silence, then returned to their separate tasks. But as afternoon wore on, a restlessness took hold. The house felt too small, the walls too close. Ruth found herself at the window every few minutes, scanning the horizon for riders who didn't come. Let's go to town, Ethan said suddenly. She turned from the window. What? Town, shopping, normal married people things. He grabbed his hat from the peg. Better to show our faces. Let them see we're not hiding. Take the teeth out of their gossip. The ride to Ember Creek was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. Ruth sat beside him on the wagon seat, aware of every inch of space between them. In town. Heads turned as they passed. Conversations stopping mid-sentence. Let them look, Ethan murmured. Give them something new to talk about. At the general store, Mrs. Patterson's eyes nearly popped from her head. Mrs. Rain. How lovely to see you. And so sudden. The wedding. Why? We hardly had time to prepare a proper gift. It was rather unexpected. Ruth agreed, playing the part of new bride. But when you know, you know. Indeed. Mrs. Patterson's smile was sharp with curiosity. And that unpleasant business with the deputy yesterday. So disturbing. A misunderstanding, Ruth said smoothly. My father was concerned when I left Denver so suddenly. He didn't know I was coming here to marry Ethan. We'd been corresponding, you see, planning this for months. The lie rolled off her tongue easily, necessity making her bold. Mrs. Patterson looked skeptical but couldn't argue with the fiction. They moved through town like that, Ruth spinning stories while Ethan stood solid beside her. At the feed store, she talked about their plans for the ranch. At the post office, she collected mail with her new name, making sure everyone saw. But it was at the dress shop that things shifted. Miss Catherine, the seamstress, was alone when they entered. I need some things altered, Ruth said. My clothes from Denver don't quite suit ranch life. Miss Catherine, a spinster near 40 with kind eyes, took her measurements while Ethan waited outside. When they were alone, she said quietly, I know what it's like, running from something, starting over. Ruth's hands trembled. I don't know what you mean. My father was a drunk, mean one, too. I came west 15 years ago with bruises that looked a lot like the ones you're still hiding. She patted Ruth's arm gently. You're safe here. Most folks are good people, even if they gossip. And Ethan Rain, he's better than most. Broken, maybe, but good clear through. Ruth blinked back sudden tears. Thank you. Just remember, marriage is what you make it. Convenience can become connection if you let it. They were quiet on the ride home, each lost in thought. As they neared the ranch, Ethan said, You did good back there. Quick thinking with the letter story. I've gotten good at lies. Not lies, survival. He helped her down from the wagon, his hands lingering on her waist a moment longer than necessary. There's a difference. That evening, after supper, they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains gold. The day's performance in town had exhausted Ruth, but also exhilarated her. For the first time in months, She'd walked with her head high, unafraid. "Tell me about the ranch," she said, when it was working, what it could be again. So he did. Talked about breeding programs for horses, plans for irrigation, dreams of crops beyond just sustaining themselves. His voice came alive in a way she'd rarely heard, painting pictures of a future he'd abandoned. "Why did you really stop?" she asked when he'd gone quiet. "Told you, lost the reason for it." "No, I think you stopped because it hurt to hope, because every plan for the future reminded you of the future you'd lost." She turned to look at him. "I understand that. After my mother died, I stopped playing piano. She taught me, sat beside me for every lesson. Without her there, the keys felt wrong." "Do you still play?" "Haven't touched one in 10 years. She smiled sadly. "Maybe that's what we are. Two people who stopped hoping. Maybe that's why we understand each other." "Is that what we do, understand each other?" "I think so, in the ways that matter." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness crept in. Finally, Ethan stood, offered her his hand. "Come on, something I want to show you." He led her to the barn, up a ladder to the hayloft. In the corner, covered by an old tarp, sat a piano, dusty, probably out of tune, but intact. "Sarah's father sent it as a wedding gift," Ethan explained. "She never learned to play. Always said she would someday. After, I couldn't bear to have it in the house, but couldn't get rid of it either." Ruth approached slowly, running her fingers over the dusty keys. The urge to play warred with 10 years of silence. Finally, tentatively, she pressed middle C. The note rang out. Surprisingly clear. "It's not too badly out of tune," she murmured. "Ben helped me move it up here. His wife knows how to tune. Could ask her." "Maybe." Ruth sat on the old bench, hands hovering over the keys. "I don't know if I remember how." "Only one way to find out." She started simple scales, exercises, feeling her way back to muscle memory. Then, without conscious thought, her hands found the opening notes of her mother's favorite hymn. The melody spilled out, hesitant at first, then with growing confidence. Ethan stood transfixed, in the lantern light, with music filling the space between them. Ruth transformed, the careful distance she maintained. The walls of propriety and protection, all of it fell away. This was who she'd been before, who she could be again. When the last note faded, she was crying, not the desperate tears of grief, but something cleaner, a letting go. "I'd forgotten," she whispered, "how much I loved it, how much of her lived in the music. You should play every day. Sarah would have loved it. Would have loved—" He stopped, caught by what he'd almost said. "What?" "Would have loved you, your strength, the way you face things head-on even when you're scared." He moved closer, drawn by something stronger than caution. "The way you make this place feel alive again." She looked up at him, green eyes luminous with tears and something else. Hope, maybe, or recognition of what was growing between them despite all their careful distances. "Ethan, I know. Too soon. Too fast. Too many reasons why not." He reached out, wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "But I'm tired of living in the past. Tired of being careful. Aren't you?" "Yes." The word was barely a breath. "So tired." He kissed her then, soft and careful. A question more than a statement. She answered by rising from the bench, hands finding his shoulders, kissing him back with all the longing of two people who'd forgotten they could still want. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, the barn felt too small to contain what had just shifted between them. "We should go in," Ruth said, not moving. "We should." Neither moved. The lantern flickered, casting dancing shadows. Finally, Ruth stepped back, smoothing her skirts with shaking hands. "This changes things," she said. "Everything's already changed." Minute you stepped off that train. They made their way back to the house, hyper-aware of each other. At the their bedroom door, they paused. I can still sleep in the chair. Ethan offered. No. Ruth lifted her chin, finding courage somewhere deep. We're married, whatever that means. However we define it. We're married. The chair was for watching, protecting. I don't need protection. Not from you. Not anymore. It was awkward at first, sharing space they'd carefully divided. But as they settled on opposite sides of the bed, respecting the distance while acknowledging the closeness, something eased between them. Ruth. Play again tomorrow. If you'll listen. Always. In the darkness, she reached out, found his hand in the space between them. He laced their fingers together, holding on like an anchor. Is this enough? She asked. For now. It's everything, he answered. Outside, spring wind rattled the windows, carrying the scent of new growth. The house that had stood empty for so long was full again of music, of possibility, of two people learning that convenience could indeed become connection, one careful day at a time. They fell asleep, holding hands across the divide, neither ready to close it completely, but both understanding it would close when they were ready. When the past had less hold than the future. When love, not law, made them choose each other. Summer came to Rain Ranch like a benediction, painting the hills green and gold, filling the air with the scent of wildflowers and possibility. Ruth stood in what had become her garden, hands deep in soil, coaxing life from ground that had lain fallow too long. The seedlings she'd started in the kitchen window now reached toward the sun, promising tomatoes and beans and corn. Looking good, Ethan said from behind her. She turned, shading her eyes against the morning light. He stood with a bundle of letters from town, but his eyes were on her, warm with something that had grown between them through spring's careful days. Ben says the irrigation channel should reach here by week's end, she said. We'll have water for the whole garden. We'll have more than that. He held up the letters. 3 responses to our cattle inquiries. Good stock available if we want it, including some from the Thorntons spread 2 counties over. Ruth wiped her hands on her apron, moved to read over his shoulder. Somewhere in the past months, they'd stopped saying your ranch and started saying ours. The change had come gradual as morning light, unnoticed until it simply was. Can we afford it? With what we've saved, what I had put aside, and if the horse sales go well. He folded the letters carefully. Yeah, we can start rebuilding. Small at first, but it's a beginning. She smiled up at him, and he couldn't help but cup her face in his hands, thumbs brushing over cheekbones now golden from sun instead of pale with fear. The bruises were long gone, but more than that, the haunted look had left her eyes, replaced by something bright and determined. I have something for you, he said suddenly. Been waiting for the right moment. He led her to the house, to his study where she'd first found those photographs. From the desk drawer, he pulled a small wooden box, handed it to her with unusual shyness. Inside, on a bed of blue velvet, lay a simple gold ring. It was my mother's, he explained quickly. Not the one I gave Sarah that's buried with her. This one came from Scotland with my grandmother. Been in the family longer than memory. Ruth lifted the ring, saw it was inscribed inside with words worn smooth by time. What does it say? Mo Gael Lort. It's Gaelic, means my love on you. My grandfather had it made for my grandmother when they hadn't 2 pennies to rub together. Said love was the only wealth that mattered. Ethan, I know we married for protection, not promises, but somewhere between then and now. He took the ring, held it between them like an offering. I find myself wanting promises, wanting to choose this, choose you, for more than convenience. Ruth's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. Are you asking me to marry you? Ethan Rain. Again. I'm asking you to mean it this time. Both of us. To stop pretending this is temporary and admit what we both know, that somewhere along the way, we stopped protecting each other and started loving each other. She held out her left hand, watched him slide the ring onto her finger where a plain band already sat. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting. "Yes," she said simply, "to all of it. To the ranch and the future and the promises, to choosing each other because we can't imagine choosing anyone else." He kissed her then, deep and sure, the kind of kiss that sealed promises better than any words. When they broke apart, both breathless, Ruth laughed bright and free, the sound filling the house like music. "Should we tell people have another ceremony?" "Let them wonder. What matters is what we know." He pulled her close, rested his chin on her hair. "Besides, I'd rather spend our time on other things, like that cattle deal, and fixing the east pasture, and maybe adding on to the house." "Adding on? Well, if we're rebuilding the ranch, making a real go of it, stands to reason we might need more room, eventually, for things." The implication hung between them, delicate as spring frost. Ruth pulled back to look at him, saw the question in his eyes. "For children, you mean?" "If you want. If we're blessed. I know losing Emma made you afraid to love again. I know, just like losing my mother made me afraid to play." She touched his face gently. "But we're done being afraid. Remember, we're choosing hope." That afternoon, they rode out to survey the land, planning where the new cattle would graze, which fields to plant, how to rotate the stock. The ranch spread before them, no longer abandoned but waiting, ready for the life they'd breathe back into it. They stopped at the hill where Sarah and Emma rested. Ruth had planted wildflowers there in spring, and now they bloomed in profusion, Indian paintbrush and lupine, making the graves beautiful rather than stark. "Do you think they'd approve?" Ruth asked quietly. "Of us, of this?" Ethan dismounted, helped her down, kept her hand in his as they stood before the stones. "Sarah always said this place was too big for silence, said it was meant to be full of life and laughter and chaos." He squeezed Ruth's hand. "I think she'd be glad it is again." They stood quietly for a moment. Then Ruth said, "I burned them last night, my old papers, the ones with my father's name." "Why?" "Because I'm not her anymore. Not Margaret Wells, the judge's daughter. I'm Ruth Rain, rancher's wife, piano player, garden tender, woman who chose her life instead of having it chosen for her." She turned to face him. "I wanted you to know. In case he comes, in case there are questions, Margaret Wells doesn't exist anymore. And if he does come, then he'll meet Mrs. Ethan Rain, who has a husband and neighbors and a sheriff who know her worth, who has a life worth defending." Her chin lifted in that way he'd come to love. "Let him try to take that away." They rode home as the sun slanted low, painting their land in shades of gold and possibility. At the house, Ruth started supper while Ethan tended the horses, simple rhythms of shared life, but precious now in their choosing. That night, as they lay together in the bed that had become truly theirs, Ruth traced patterns on his chest, marveling at the peace of it. No more careful distances, no more walls between them. "I want to have a party," she said suddenly. "A party?" "A celebration. Invite the neighbors, the town, show them who we really are now. Not the grieving widower and the runaway, but the Rains, the couple rebuilding this ranch, making a future." "You sure you're ready for that? The questions, the scrutiny?" "I'm ready to stop hiding, to claim this life we're building." She propped herself on an elbow, looked down at him. "Unless you'd rather keep me secret." "Never." He pulled her down for a kiss. "Party it is. Martha will be beside herself with joy." 2 weeks later, Rain Ranch blazed with light and laughter for the first time in 5 years. Lanterns hung from every post and tree. Tables groaned with food. and Ruth's piano, moved to the main house and properly tuned, filled the air with music. The whole town came, curious and cautious at first, then warming as they saw the transformation. The house that had stood like a tombstone now welcomed them in. The man they'd written off as broken actually smiled as he showed off new livestock and repaired buildings. And Ruth, the mystery woman who'd arrived bruised and nameless, played hostess with grace and genuine warmth. "She's good for him," Ben told anyone who would listen. "Both of them lost so much. But look at them now, like spring after the longest winter." As the evening wore on, someone called for dancing. Ruth played while others danced, but then Martha shooed her away from the piano, taking over with enthusiasm, if not skill. Ethan held out his hand to Ruth, formal as any gentleman. "May I have this dance, Mrs. Rain?" "Always, Mr. Rain." They danced on the porch they'd once shared in careful silence, now surrounded by community and possibility. Other couples joined them, the boards creaking under the weight of so much life. "No regrets?" Ethan asked as they swayed together. "Only one." His brow furrowed. "What?" "That it took so long to get here. But then again," she smiled up at him, "maybe we both needed the journey, needed to choose each other instead of just falling together out of loneliness." Ruth Rain, philosopher. "Oh, Ruth Rain, grateful." She rested her head against his chest. "For all of it, even the hard parts. They led us here." The party continued late into the night, but eventually guests departed with warm wishes and promises to help with the ranch's rebuilding. As the last wagon disappeared into darkness, Ethan and Ruth stood on their porch, surveying the transformed yard. "We did it," Ruth said softly. "We're really doing this." "Building a life, yeah, we are." He wrapped his arms around her from behind, rested his chin on her head. "Fair warning, ranching's hard work. Long days, uncertain weather, difficult years ahead." "I'm not afraid of hard work or difficult years." She turned in his arms. "I'm only afraid of facing them alone, and that's one fear I don't have anymore." They went inside together, to the house that was no longer empty, no longer silent. In the parlor, Sarah's sewing basket sat beside Ruth's knitting. In the kitchen, 2 sets of everything spoke of shared meals and partnered days. Up the stairs, past the door to what would someday be a nursery again, to their room where 2 lives had become one. As they prepared for bed, Ruth noticed Ethan had hung something new on the wall, a wooden sign, carefully carved in his neat hand. "Home," she read aloud. "Ben suggested it months ago, but I wasn't ready then. Now," he shrugged, suddenly shy. "Seemed right." "It is right, all of it." She pulled him close, kissed him with all the promise of their new beginning. "We're home, Ethan, both of us, finally home." Outside, summer wind carried the scent of growing things, of rain on the horizon, of seasons turning and life continuing. The ranch that had nearly died was alive again, ready for whatever tomorrow brought. And in their bed, 2 people who'd thought themselves beyond saving held each other close. Proof that sometimes the best love stories begin not with falling, but with choosing hope over fear, future over past, and each other over everything else. They'd started as strangers seeking shelter from their storms. They'd become partners through necessity and proximity. But now, at last, they were what they'd always been meant to be. 2 hearts choosing one life. Not because they had to, but because they couldn't imagine it any other way. The circle was complete. The ranch had its family again. And somewhere in the summer darkness, the wind carried their contentment across the hills, whispering to anyone who'd listen that love, real love, was always worth the wait, always worth the risk, always worth choosing again and again. In the morning, they'd rise together to face whatever came, but tonight, they held each other in the home they'd built from ashes and hope, complete in their choosing, whole in their love. ready for all the tomorrows they'd tend together like the most precious garden of all. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to hear where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss your thoughts about Ruth and Ethan's journey. If you enjoyed this tale of love and redemption in the Old West, please subscribe to Wild West Night. Give this video a like and hit the hype button to help more people discover these stories of the American frontier. Your support means everything and helps me continue bringing these heartfelt narratives to life. Until next time, partners.